Joining us today. My name is Tim Bowman. I'm the chair of the diversity community for ACE. The co-chair of our committee is Latasha Ford. Give everybody a wave there. And we'd like to welcome everybody to the first of our series of 3 webinars that will address diversity and inclusion within the communications environment. Today we have an inclusion practitioner, Tanya Parker of Wesleyan College in Macon, Georgia. There'll be a brief question and answer period at the end of the webinar. So if you'll just submit your questions throughout the chat or throughout the presentation in the chat, and then we'll go over those all together at the end. And with that, I'll just turn this over to Ms. Parker. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Tim. Good, I guess, afternoon to everyone. I'm not sure. I heard it's 12 for some of you. It's 1 here for me. And so I just want to go ahead and let you know I am going to be showing a PowerPoint, but I will also come back so I can see your faces and you can see mine. So I'm going to go ahead now and just share my screen and start, and then we will go from there. Okay, can I get a head nod from either Tim or Latasha? You can see it? Okay, perfect. All right. So here we are. When I began to prepare for this presentation, I asked myself, what is it that you want to achieve? What are you seeking as your outcome? And that foundational outcome was what I was thinking. It is something that I want to do. It's a point that I want to make. Is it something I want people to walk away from and think about or ponder, put into actions? And then I said, I know exactly what it is that I want to do. I want to start with the end in mind. And so in doing that, go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. I began with the end in mind, and I thought about what Stephen R. Covey said. To begin with the end in mind is to start with a clear understanding of your destination. It means to know where you're going, that you better understand where you are now, and so that you can take the steps that you're always headed in the right direction. So that's the idea of what I'm doing today. So in this moment here with all of us, a group of diverse individuals with visible and invisible diversity, we see one another and we can make assumptions about who we are, where we come from, what we do, just based on these identifiers, the way we see people. And what I mean by identifiers, those are those identity categories in which people often use to define themselves and others, such as race, ethnic background, gender, age, and all of these characteristics in which the human race is diverse. And mind you, I said human race, because when I get to race a little bit further down, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we've done with race as opposed to just the human race. And so with this diversity that we have here also comes the ability to create and to sustain shared spaces in which acceptance is viewed as priority, is consistently advocated for, and then intentionally practiced. And so with this in mind, go on to the next. I want us to begin to think about diversity, inclusion, equity. So when I say that we are diverse, we come together and there are some things that we have to do to practice true inclusion. Inclusion is a very simple concept when you think about it. There's this idea of let's just include everybody. And when we include everybody, we should be fine. But inclusion itself is actually sometimes misunderstood and mismanaged. And in order to create a diverse and inclusive workplace, we have to have an inclusive workplace ethos. And that comes from everyone involved. The diversity is here because we showed up. Before I started showing my PowerPoint, I was looking at the faces of the people as you were joining and just seeing all of the beautiful diversity that is present. But then when we talk about serving and when we do our service to whomever our clients or customers are, we have to think about an unspoken need because the people are here, but what is it that they need? And what's my responsibility in this? Well, inclusive workplaces are founded upon equity and collegiality, in which everyone has to do their part in order to create that sense of belonging that we all long for. And when you work, do you think that your values and your input is valued when you say things? When you bring things to the table, is your input appreciated? Is inclusion thriving at the heart of your workplace where people are productive and they feel the spirit of prosperity from an energy of people working together, moving forward, and realizing that these are individuals that are bringing this together to move us forward in our service? And when everyone has exactly what they need to be successful, that's how you get to equity. So let's look at this slide of equality and equity. If you see the equality boxes for the individuals who are there at the fence, you see that everyone has the same thing. And a lot of people believe that that's okay. When they're serving people, they say, hey, I gave everybody the same thing, therefore I was equal. Yes, you were. However, you may not have been equitable. Because when you get to being equitable, you look at exactly what each individual needs to be successful. As you see the person who is shorter in height, the one block just doesn't do him or her justice. And I'll just say him, I'll call it him. But he needed two blocks in order to get his head above the fence, and it's barely even doing that. So, but at least he can see now because he was at a terrible disadvantage when he had the one block, which was equal to the other two people. And then the one in the middle didn't have to get any block. The first one that was given was just enough. Didn't need a second one, but if you took it away, then she would have been at a disadvantage. But look at the person on the end. That person is tall enough to not necessarily need a block. I mean, it could put you way over the top or whatever, but not necessarily needed. So therefore, this person's what they needed was not the same as what the other persons needed to at least have the same view and to see what's going on. And that's how we have to think about when we serve people too. What can we bring to the table to make sure that we are giving them the thing they need to understand, to be successful, or whatever it is that we're trying to deliver? We have to be mindful of people that way. Instead of waiting all the time for them to ask us, we have to be enough on our end as the service provider to think about and do our homework to see what people need and to help them to get to a place of success. The first step in doing that is to think about true inclusion. When we do think about true inclusion, when I said before, the concept is easy. It includes everyone, everything. But then we have to be mindful that each person is an individual, and each individual has different pieces that make them who they are. There are those identifiers that I was talking about. We could look at people and we could see, like, maybe their skin color. We can assume that we know their age or even ethnic background, maybe gender or whatever. But some people see these things and they have assumptions that they make, like prejudgments about it. But here's the thing. Humans, we do that naturally. We have our opinions, thoughts, judgments, but it's the action or what we do with those. Is it a positive thing? Is it a negative thing that we're thinking? And why? Why are we thinking these things? And what does that mean? Okay, what about your workplace? Do your colleagues and your coworkers, do they come from different ethnic and cultural and even spiritual backgrounds than yourself? Do you have representation of different genders and different sexual orientations? And what you know, but even if you did or didn't, would it change the way you behave with that person or the things you say? Because there's a diverse range of opinions and perspective that comes with the diversity. And so, right now, I was just talking about in our respective workplaces. But think about beyond the workplace, the people that you serve. What about all the pieces that make them who they are? Would some things make you treat them differently or have some type of different effect based on what you know or think you know about the person? Would it change the way you serve? And if so, is that a positive or negative thing? That's part of what we have to keep in mind when we're serving others and being mindful of our own biases. And we'll get to biases in a few minutes. Okay, so this extension of inclusion that I'm talking about is getting down to the point of acceptance and equity within an organization, because the more equitable you become or equity minded, you will begin to give people what they need to be respectful without being hindered by your own views of whatever these pieces are that makes them who they are. There's that unspoken need that people have. And that unspoken need is to be treated with the utmost respect as a human being should be, right? We all want to be treated fairly. We want equal opportunities. We want access to the things that we need to help us be successful. Everybody knows that when we have what we need and we feel supported, we can do our best. But if there are hurdles that we have to jump that are sometimes even unnecessary, but they're put there because the person or the people who are providing the service have some type of like bias or a negative thought, opinion, or judgment based on whatever the diversity that is represented in the client or the person in the workspace, because that unspoken need of just wanting to be treated fairly and also as a human being, that's in the back of everyone's mind. Even a person don't think about it. I don't think people will raise their hands, and I don't know everyone, right? I don't know everyone in the world, so I can't make that generalization. But in the back of my mind, I do believe that there's no one who's going to raise their hand and say, hey, I want to be treated unfairly. I want to be treated negatively. I don't think people really believe that way or think that way. But if you do come across someone that does, you may want to ask a few questions so you can understand why that is something that they would seek. Because whatever we're thinking about people, it is going to come out in the way that we serve and the way that we treat them. It's just part of human nature. So that is why there's that shared responsibility. We each share in that practice and that promotion of equity and inclusion. And it requires this consciousness of our own biases, beliefs, experiences, our worldviews, our behaviors, our choices, our attitude. Our thoughts about people can cause us to act, react, and behave differently than we normally do in certain circumstances. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a minute and I'll go back to it in a minute. I want to talk about implicit bias a little bit now that you all can see my face and I can see yours a little bit. Implicit biases, when we think about those are those biases that people are not aware of. Like a person may have implicit biases and they can answer truthfully by saying, I do not hold biased beliefs, but their actions may still produce biased results. So another way of thinking about it is that implicit bias is unconscious. It's really something that a person thinks, but then their behavior can directly contradict what they said they believe or hold to be true. And an example of that would be when a person says, I'm colorblind, and nevertheless, they may be hiring people of a particular race or color, just continuously, consistently doing that. So then you look at who's there, but the person over here saying, and someone may bring that to their attention, you have a bias towards X, Y, and Z, or you are more preferential towards X, Y, and they be like, no, that's not true because that's not what I believe. But then when you look at the example of what is actually tangible and easy to see, then the belief and the value of what has been said, it doesn't line up. Now, does that mean that's the case? Not necessarily, but it's something to think about. And sometimes when people are called to think about the thing, they get defensive. It's like, no, but it's not always just to call someone out, if you will, or to make someone feel bad, but just to say, hey, but look at the product, look at what you're producing or what you're doing over and over and what it looks like, because optics can really prove that maybe we need to do a little bit more to diversify or do something different so that what we say we believe is actually being practiced and we'll have the true example of what it looks like. And when people do say, I'm colorblind and I don't see color, I understand what the message is they're trying to convey. I believe when I hear that people are saying your skin color, your race, it does not change the way I'm going to treat you. I think that's what they mean. But of course, I don't know unless I ask to confirm that. But what I hear, because communication is so important, is that you're saying you really don't see me. Because in this skin, in this body, and in this lack of hair or whatever, this is something different. I know that. I walk into a space, I'm fully aware of the fact that I don't have hair. So I know sometimes I get looks from children because they're shocked. You know, they're like, oh, this woman doesn't have any hair. And some of them actually say that. But sometimes I spend time talking to the child or the children if the parents or whoever they're with have engaged with the conversation. Sometimes I just smile and nod, and when they see that smile, it's like, I heard you, but it's okay. I'm still a human being, and so I'm trying to communicate something to them that, you know, I see you too, but guess what? Just human being, just like you, just happen to not have hair. So then when we get to the part where we talk about race and color, when someone says that I don't see your race or I don't see your color, sometimes what that does is actually cause a little bit more harm, because what that could also mean is that you may not understand that there may be a difference in when you don't recognize that my journey may be a little bit more different. My experiences may be different than yours, but you're saying that because we're equal, but we are equal in humanity, but life experiences, cultural differences, and history can actually make it mean something different. So it depends on the level of commitment into communication that we want to have to talk about this. So instead of saying, I don't see color, just say, you know, I try to treat people X, Y, and Z as fair as I can or as equal as I can or whatever, but don't say I don't see you, because that's how I interpret I don't see color, because I'm fully a colored person is what people say, and we don't use that term anymore, but my grandmother does, you see. And then there's also time. My grandmother would say, hey, you know, I'm a colored woman. When she says that, sometimes my head is going, what, grandma? Nobody says that anymore, you know. But then it's just time, and then there's that. But that bridge of understanding, my grandmother and I have had that conversation, but that is where she is, and she does not mean any harm by calling herself colored. She thought at the time, well, that's just who we are. But you see, we have that understanding because we've communicated, and there's nothing wrong when she says that to her. But if someone else in my generation or below says that, they're ready to explain, like, no, you explain yourself. What do you mean by that? Like, you know, because there's a different time and a different generation. But as long as I think people are open to understanding and bridging gaps to make sure they know what it means to the person they're talking to, that's when you would treat the person the way they want to be treated. You see, there's a difference in, well, I'm going to do this thing because I believe it's right, or this is the way I was taught. That's actually taking a dominant stance in something that should not be happening. When a person is telling you that this is what I would like to be called, this is how I like to be addressed, the other part, the responsibility on you is to say, okay, and start utilizing that name or whatever it is that they've told you, because then that's saying, I value and respect what you have said enough that I will try my best to use that name or use that identifier or to use that pronoun, because that's saying, I've heard you and I'm going to respect you enough to do it. And it has nothing to do with what you think about what that person has told you. It's just that you respect them enough to use it. And that's very important. And then there are those explicit bias. We talked about some type of bias, but this is the one when an individual is aware of having the bias. For example, if a person holds a negative belief about a particular group of people, be it a race, or ethnic group, or any kind of identifier, they would hold this thought, and it will exemplify in the way that they act, is measured through some kind of self-assessment, because you're thinking about it. Your brain is reporting to you what you think about this person or people when you come into contact with them. You might want to, if you're fearing someone, you might grab your purse a little bit closer to you. You may roll up your window because you see this. You may be walking along the plane and you see some person and you start feeling like, oh no, panic. Those are biases, and your biases are telling you something, even if you don't act upon them. Okay, so these things, they come down to like you're telling yourself that something is making you uncomfortable, and it's self-reporting inside, even if you don't act upon it, you don't say anything, but it's there. Okay, so some of the things that have happened in far as workplaces are like laws and changes to protect people from when they do act on their biases. For example, Title VII in the workplace, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It protects employees from being discriminated against based on certain characteristics such as race, color, national origin, and things like that. and they're supported by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, otherwise known as the EEOC. Because you see, sometimes as things are changing, history, place, we have to like make sure, because we can't depend that everyone is going to do the same thing at the same time to make equitable access and treatment across the board. Sometimes you have to enforce laws and regulations to make sure that is happening, and it goes hand in hand to holding people accountable to make sure that everyone has the same things that they need, or at least access to it, which means being more equitable as opposed to just being equal. Because if you say, hey, it's here for everybody, but there are some hurdles that people have to jump, there are some things that must be done to make sure that everyone actually does get what they need and they have a way of getting there. But it would be great if we all said, like I was talking about before, like, oh, we all are equal and I treat everybody the same. I love people just as they are. Our life experiences shape how we think, what we've done, what we hear, what we've been taught. All of that shapes us. And then those biases come up and we have a lean towards someone or towards people or away from, or, away from, and we believe in some type of separation from others based on something that is complete, that has made a superiority or inferiority complex come alive inside of us, and then we act on it. And so here's the thing: when people come to acknowledge this, sometimes they say, oh no, that makes me a bad person, so they never talk about it. I think it's just a human thing. It's human, but when it comes up, how far, what do you do next? Do you question yourself and say, why am I thinking this? Why believe that? That takes more work. It's a lot of work to get to a place of being more equal and equity minded. And then to go beyond that, to try to start making these changes within so that whatever comes out, what's external, begins to look like what you're saying you believe. And therefore, your biases don't become the things that you show. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. See if I can get it to move. All right. You bring diversity and I bring diversity. It starts with awareness, and awareness can bring about the acceptance of others as they are, and we can be willing to learn and to grow and to build relationships intentionally. And with that comes that bridging of gaps of understanding. And this will enable us to overcome any negative thoughts that are associated with difference, and even the fears that are associated with difference, because bias can be flexible. Studies have shown that bias can change in response to our motives and environment by merely understanding the concept of bias and telling ourselves, don't do it, can be ineffective. It actually becomes more when you put it into action, that when that thought comes up or that judgment comes up, that you change it, or you're more mindful of what you're going to say or what you're going to do. Because there are some ways that we can disrupt the things that hinder us from becoming the more diverse, equitable, and equal human race that we want to be, and in our service to each other. So the hindrances that you see there, I have them listed out for you. And the one that I'm going to talk about now is the microaggressions. Microaggressions come out in communication quite a bit. It can be verbal, it can be behavioral, but it's these insults and these dismissals that communicate a kind of hostile or derogatory or a negative attitude towards someone, and it could be usually like a culturally marginalized group, and it's usually not intentional. It can be intentional, but usually microaggressions are not intentional, because when people usually say microaggressive statements, they also follow it by with like, I'm just kidding, or I'm just joking, or laugh, because they're saying that they mean no harm. However, before I go into why that's problematic, first let me just kind of give you some phrases that are microaggressive. Like if someone, like say a male swings a bat, they're playing a baseball game and somebody yells, you hit like a girl, okay? You run like a girl. That's microaggressive. If someone says something and another person goes, that's so gay, that's microaggressive. If someone says something, and listen, this may not even sound harmful, but that's insane. Someone in the space that hears that's insane could be someone that is actually struggling with mental health. And hearing that could be a trigger for them or some way alienate them. And you're like, oh my gosh, nobody meant anything by that. But there's another part to it. Sometimes we will say things that harm and hurt people, but that's when it comes down to that shared responsibility. If someone brings it to your attention that what you said was hurtful or harmful, instead of always defending what you said and what you meant by it, sometimes we just have to say, I am so sorry. I did not mean anything by that, but now I need to stop using it. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'm so sorry that my words hurt you, or something like that, that type. It doesn't have to be those words verbatim, but we have to think about it. And I know some people go, oh gosh, that's so much hard work. It's like to be so sensitive or whatever. But we're trying to, if you're truly intentional and want to build an inclusive environment and service relationship with people, then you would try. And when it's brought to your attention, you would own it and say something about trying to make it better. And even if you're not meaning to harm, if it's brought to your attention that harm has been done, then we have to own it and say something about it. I mean, do something too. So another microaggression I'll just share with you happened to one of my students here at the college. She told me that other students often ask her, "Where are you from? Where are you from?" And she says, "I'm from Orlando." And they say, "No, where are you really from?" And she said, "I need to find a way to tell them I was born and raised in the United States, but my family is from Pakistan. So I wanted, but I don't, why do I have to share my family history or to explain why I'm here when other people?" And so we started having what we call DID, diversity and inclusion discussions here at the college. And we had people together, just groups of random students. You couldn't sit with your friends. We just counted people off: one, two, three, four. Okay, go ones over here, twos over here, whatever. And we had questions for each one to go around and talk. By the end, we had people like, I've never really thought about what this means to other people, or how it sounds and how hurtful it can be. But this is very eye opening, it's insightful, it's helpful. And we do these every year at least, but sometimes twice a year, each semester. And our faculty and staff are doing that as well. And then I also trained other outside groups that I serve. It could be church groups, other businesses and organizations, how microaggressions and biases and things like that can really be harmful, and they can break down the relationships that we're trying to build. So here's the thing: when we communicate with people in diverse encounters, don't think that it's just common sense is going to get everybody on the same page. Like, oh, that's common sense that this is not going to happen, or we're not going to say these things. Common sense isn't as common as we think. Sometimes we actually have to do a little bit more work to get to a place of understanding. And by adjusting how we interact with others to accommodate language barriers and different opinions and life experiences, we build better bridges to communication. And when we talk about communication, we do communicate, all of us, with different people in diverse settings. That's just what we do. We communicate, right? And when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to be a little bit more intentional on making sure we're communicating the right things, because there may be language barriers when we're talking to others, in which the experience becomes a little bit more difficult of trying to convey a message, because a lot is lost because there isn't a common shared language. But these challenges don't have to be as bad if we do inclusive actions to try to go beyond those language barriers. So, what does that look like? Maybe taking your time and to listen carefully and intentionally. And I'm not saying in those situations, when the person doesn't understand someone's language, they speak louder. I know that used to be like a joke, and I hope it still is. It's like when someone says, "I can't," when they don't understand you, instead of speaking a little bit slower and then trying to do whatever it takes. Sometimes hand languages, or just trying to point out something, or trying to find a common ground to communicate, some people go to speaking louder. And it's like, well, you can speak louder, but I still don't understand what you're saying, because your language is what's the barrier. It's not how loud or how low you're speaking. And then also being patient. Sometimes when we get frustrated when we don't understand, and communication blocks are up. So we have to almost find that common ground, just talking, say, I'm so sorry. Because I've spoken with a few people when we don't have the same language. And even though I'm still speaking English, I'm like, I'm so sorry. And it's like, I don't understand. And then they would probably shrug their shoulders like me either or whatever. We can laugh, but like, okay, so what are we gonna do? We pull out a sheet of paper, start drawing stuff and all kinds of charades and all that. And next thing you know, somebody knows something and it happens and we laugh, but that could go in such a another direction when people say, oh, you just need to speak English. Well, okay, why don't you learn to speak their language too? You know, just something to think about. And then also, we have to be mindful that sometimes we use language, you know, like these jargons, or sometimes we be speaking in these acronyms that are lost upon people. Like Miss Latasha, she did a great job when she told me we have our ACE conference, and then she told me what ACE was because I know an ACE, but it wasn't you all's ACE. You see what I'm saying? There are different things that mean different things to different people. So taking time to explain and making sure the connections are made, that just goes a long way. That shows like, hey, I care enough to make sure that you understand where I'm coming from, understand where you're coming from. And if I have questions, I will ask them. And so then language gets a little bit more complicated, as you guys know, because then there's gender specific language that we're accustomed to using. I remember back in the day, and I don't know what the day is, but back in the day when people used to always refer to people in law enforcement as policemen, right? But now, and then the people delivering mail as mailman or the mailman or whatever. But now we have to think about it. It's like a law enforcement person. It could be a police officer, which could be male or female. And then the person who's your mail carrier may not be a policeman. So they're different things. And when we know better, we do better. And sometimes when you tell someone, oh, this minor correction, they get defensive. It's like, oh, you know, that's just what I always said. Not a good response. Okay, not a good response to just focus on that's the way it's always been, that's the way I've always said it. That is also showing and telling that I don't have a willingness to change and to do better and to be a better communicator with people because I'm taking a hard stand on the way I want it to be or the way I'm comfortable with it being or used to it being. And so we have to be mindful of when we say things like that. And even with names, it meant a lot to some of our students here that I try to learn to pronounce their names. And sometimes they'll choose English names, but there's not their name. So I asked them, it's like, are you okay with me calling you, Michelle? Or is that the name? It's like, oh, it's just easier for people. So Michelle. And I was like, but do you prefer Michelle? Like, no. I'll say, okay, teach me to say your name. And we would sit there and I would have to move my mouth and try to say it a little differently. And I say, I'm going to keep practicing every time. Do you know when that student graduated 2 years ago, I received this card of just how much it meant to her that you cared enough. That's what she said to me. You cared enough to try to pronounce my name right. And she said, by the way, the last few months before I graduated, you had it. I laughed the last few months. That made me laugh. Like, okay, so what was I doing the first time? But I was trying, and that meant a lot. So it's just the little things. You just never know. All right, so then let's look at what I just have on my screen about communication. So let's just say we're all speaking English and we say something. There's that first statement, and this is from Norman Wright from his book Communication at Work. Says that in what we say, there's these five messages. There could be three, there could be seven, I don't know, but these are the five that he said. It's what you mean to say. In your mind, you're thinking, I'm going to say this thing. But then when you open your mouth and say it, there's something that you actually said, which may not be the same as what was in your mind to say. Then on the receiving end, there's the person who hears what you said, and then it filters through whatever their experience is, and that becomes the number four. What this person thinks about what you said. They may have heard you very clearly what you said, but because their experience is different, they're going to think about it differently than what you actually said. And then there's that other step five, when they go and repeat what you said, but that may not be what you intended or what you actually said. Okay, so somewhere that whole thing, I remember that game, like phone, I think it was called telephone or something. Somebody would start a message, it'll go around this circle or this group, and by the time it gets to the person who said it, people are like, that's not what I said at all. Somewhere something got lost in translation, or just like someone didn't hear the person, and so they made it up, right? So when we think about that, I'll leave us with this quote. You cannot control what another person thinks, says, or does, but you can control two things: what you say to yourself about yourself and how you respond to what others say about you. and do to you. And so that kind of reminds me of like the things that are out of our control, we may not be able to do anything about it. But what we can say about ourselves, to ourselves, and how we respond to what has been done or said to us, that is a little bit more or a lot more in our own control. So, what are we going to do about it? And sometimes being in the situation isn't the best time to decide that. You kind of have an idea of when something is happening. It's good to have some kind of foundational belief or some kind of foundational value that you kind of spring from when you're in a situation in which something has been misconstrued, misunderstood, misstated, or whatever, because otherwise, then more conflict is going to come from it. And I'd rather be on the side of trying to make things better or right or something like that, as opposed to continuing with what's wrong. So that leads to, well, what can I do to promote and foster inclusion, be more equitable? Well, if there's any real or imagined boundaries that can hinder you or hinder others or yourself, identify them, address them, and then eliminate them if you can. Identifying things goes a long way because then it tells you that you have a choice in the matter. Now that you're aware of this thing, what are you going to do with it? And then we have to also be habitually mindful of when we other people, right? And so this is what I was talking about the human race. There is no superior or inferior race within human existence. If we feel or think that there is a superior or inferior race, it's something that we've either been taught or we picked up somewhere. It's our understanding of the world. But I like to use the blood example when we talk about the human race. If I needed blood, it doesn't matter if the person is also African American or Black. We just need to have the same blood type. And the different blood types go across what we identify as races. And the races that we call races, Black, white, Asian, all of those things that we call races, they actually have more social construct to them than the actual body or human existence itself. For example, think about blood, not only blood transfusions, but other transfusions. If someone can be on a list, we're not waiting for a certain race or a certain, blood type. Well, blood type, yes, maybe, but not a certain race for that particular thing. It either fits or it doesn't, and it's another human being that you need it from. And so we have to be mindful of that because if we take off the top layer or skin, take off our epidermis, and you have your skeletal system and you have your muscular system and all of that, and you don't have any hair or eyes or anything, and you're just looking at a body, you're just gonna say, like, what is that? The skeleton or the muscular system of a human being. Then when you start to put the stuff on top of it and the skin and the eye colors and everything, then we start to see what we use as identifiers to either divide or to come together based on how we feel about what we're looking at. We have to be intentional about learning more about the people around us. And the best way to learn from people is to look for common ground, who are people that are different from us, right? Because we all, oh my gosh, have so much in common, but we usually start sometimes with differences because that's what we see. But communication can bring us together when we start to come up with, sharing stories. There may be something that people do that is kind of odd to them. Like, hey, I have this habit that I do X, Y, and Z. Oh, I do that too. But they never would have discovered that if they had not communicated, talked with each other. And when we do engage in conversations with people who are different from us, I've said it before, but owning and apologizing if someone brings something to your attention that offends them is not our time or place to start talking about our intentions and what we meant and what we think and all of this about it. If harm has been done, we also have the power to dismantle or bring that harm down by owning it and letting that person know, I hear you and I'm going to do something different going forward. And then we could go from the golden rule to the platinum rule. And I love this because the golden rule says what? Treat people the way you want to be treated. And once you start with that, and then you have communicated with a person and you realize how they want to be treated, treat them that way, right? Because usually we do unto people what we want done unto us or the way that we understand it. But if they tell us different, do that. Like, for instance, I mean, it could be simple things. When people come over to my house, sometimes because I'm a coffee drinker, I have coffee with all of these various creamers and all of this. But then sometimes people will not drink the coffee. It's like, oh, I'm more of a tea drinker. It's like, oh, you know what? I drink tea too. What kind do you like? But the tea, I don't have as much variety, but I have some. And so then when I know that a person who's more of a tea drinker is coming, I make sure I have that. So then I am treating them the way that they want to be treated. They come in and they see I took an extra step, right? And then let's go beyond simple things like that. If a person tells you their name, which is so important, use that name. And when you make a mistake, don't be dismissive and, passive about it. Make the effort, like I did with the student. When you know how a person wants to be treated, do that as opposed to what you want to do. Do what they need you to do, have asked you to do, have shared with you that they want you to do. And when we know our service, our product, or whatever it is that we do well enough, we are able to explain it on multiple levels with diverse people, with mindfulness and intentionality. And so that means, like, even this presentation that I'm doing here, if I was doing this for students, right? And I'm not talking about college students, I'm talking about students in like elementary school. I might bring a book that has something to do about, bringing diverse people together. I might tell a story as opposed to a Zoom meeting and using a PowerPoint presentation, because I know how to share this information at that level. I know how to share it here with the students, then a little bit more with the faculty and staff and whatever. So what I'm saying is, if you know what you're trying to convey through your service or through your language and communication, whatever it is, you must also, to do it well, know how to communicate beyond just one group or one demographic. Okay. If there's something that you've learned that's going to make it better in this area, do that there. And see, and that makes you more versatile too and more approachable. And people will see that you cared enough to do something different as opposed to just, this is just what it is, and this is my box, and this is the way I do it. Right. And then at the core of all of this is, remember that we all are individuals, no matter what we look like, no matter what our identifiers are, no matter what group we belong to. And these groups can be race, ethnicities, religion, any kind of group that how people identify themselves or the way that other people identify them. At the end of the day, there's still individuality. We fall into stereotyping when we say that a group of people, all of the people in this group does this thing, or all of them believe this thing. That's just not true, because we have not met every person of this demographic or this group. So there may be this assumption that we have from wherever we got it, but to assume that that's right and start to imply that in our service, that's a mistake on our part. And so we have to own that. We have to learn from people what it is that they need, what they want in order to be successful. And we change up to make sure that we're serving. And we won't get it right, but we must be willing to try. And with that comes being open to learning, growing, and where we need to, changing. So at the end of this, where I am now, I'm going to have to ask us. So I just shared an umbrella of information. I went in a little bit deeper on some things I was kind of on the top. But what I just shared with you, what are you willing to do with that? Like, I shared it, you like check, I attended this webinar and that's it. Will you think about it some more, like when you leave, because I've touched on the surface of a lot of things. So just kind of like, what does that mean? What about implicit and explicit biases? What about thinking of people from the human race as opposed to the races that I'm more accustomed to, that we've created and we share and we bubble in and check off on forums and things like that? What about language? When we communicate with people, what are we doing to make sure that we're understood and that we're understanding, right? And then that's taking a personal account of responsibility when you say, how can I, and that personalize it, contribute to creating a great experience that is inclusive and respectful of all people. Remember, our thoughts are alive. They're not only in our minds, they come out in our actions, words, and behavior. And it's through our actions, words, and behaviors that we communicate. So we're always saying something, but what are we saying? What is the body language saying? I always like to say this on Zoom. Sometimes, like when we're on Zoom, I read faces. I'm looking into the screen now to talk to you, but when I look at your faces, when I get ready to, I'll go ahead and do that now. I want to see who's on with me. Okay, I can see your faces, and that tells me something too, because if I look and somebody's like, and I'll put you to sleep. It's like, what did I do? If I see smile, that tells me something. If I see that thought that, how some people, I can't even do it now because I'm trying too hard, but they have that, I'm thinking about it, I'm processing look, I can see that, but I'm always looking at the screen to see who's with me, what are they doing? And it tells me something too, because we're always communicating, is what I'm getting at. We're always communicating verbally, body language, and the things that we choose to share, images that we choose for different things. We're always communicating. But what are we saying? That's where that intentionality comes in. We have to make sure we're saying exactly what we're thinking and it comes out. Now, we're not responsible too much on what happens on the other end, but as much as it depends on us, we do our part to make sure that we're being fair, equitable, from an accepted perspective, and we're mindful. That's it. Mindfulness is a key to the type of service I'm talking about. I mean, I'm thinking about what I'm doing. I'm intentional about how I'm doing it, and therefore I'm doing my best, and I'm going to own when I make mistakes. So, with that in mind, I'm going to close out now and be open to answering any questions or expounding on anything that you all need.
Before we do that, I'd like to thank you, Ms. Parker, for sharing your experiences and knowledge. We're going to be sharing a link in the chat. Latasha's put that up there for a survey. We really appreciate if you would fill that out for us. A little housekeeping. This is, like I said, this is the first of our series of 3 webinars. We'll be having another speaker in January, March, and then a final one will be in May. So keep an eye out for those. Those will also be on diversity and inclusion in the communications environment. Again, thank you, Ms. Parker. We don't have any questions so far. If you have one and you're typing it out, please do that. If you have any questions later, feel free to email me. We'll send those on to Ms. Parker and then send answers out to everybody.
May I ask a question, Tim, if that's
Oh, please do. Absolutely.
okay, thank you. So just some feedback from people, even if they don't have questions, just is there something that stood out or, so I just kind of like want to hear because sometimes that helps me like, going forward on things. Just any kind of thing anyone wants to share that'll help all of us. Okay, I see a Catherine.
Go for it, Catherine.
Yeah, I really liked, it was such in some ways, a simple formulation where you said that, equity, diversity, and inclusion is core to a service relationship with people. And I think that as, honestly, sometimes within extension, when we're talking about statewide challenges in advancing and changing the culture, I thought that was such a perfect little kernel to be able to share that I think because extension is nothing else but service, right, to all of our communities, whoever. And that is so core to our mission and our belief. And that formulation is, I think, so going to be so persuasive. So in and of itself, thank you for that. I just think that's going to have such power as part of the messaging.
Thank you for sharing that, Catherine.
Agreed.
Yeah. And then if I could just ask, I was really intrigued by your saying, because we're having a series of, we have an edict council, we call it, and we're having a series of fireside conversations, really trying to get people comfortable to talk about their discomfort oftentimes in living in this space, again, thinking about how diverse statewide we are, staff, faculty, and our people we serve, work with, our partners. And I was curious, you talked about your these conversations that you had, and it almost sounded like kind of round robin. Would you mind sharing a little bit about how you structured that?
Sure. The DID, diversity and inclusion discussions that we do. Okay. So let's say we're about to do a DID. And so as people are coming in, one thing that we do intentionally is set up what we call sanctuary. whoever's in the group, we do have facilitators. Like for instance, if I'm the facilitator, me and Tim are facilitators. Okay, so Tim might be the scribe. That means that we have notepads up that everyone can see. That's an intentional move. And he's writing down what everyone is saying, and I'm asking the question. So I'm standing here or sitting, however we're doing this, I'm talking. He's writing down things. And I said, okay, so now we're going to make this a safe and brave space. So we're creating sanctuary. What are some things that you all think we need to do and be mindful of, or while people are speaking? Some people say, okay, be respectful. Okay, then Tim write that. Listen attentively. Do not disturb people when they're speaking. Okay, so we write all this down. If someone says something that's hurtful, do not attack them. Let's talk about it. Let's ask questions. So we have all these things like anything else. And you let the group, you don't, we don't tell the group what to do. They tell us what they want to do. And once we have all of this, and if we get to a place where it starts to get a little bit contentious or something, Tim would be the one that goes back over like, do not speak when someone else is speaking, or remember to listen until a person is done. And then we also never criticize. If someone says something that we disagree with, we can ask a question. We all agree to this, that I would not say, well, I think you're wrong about this. We don't take that kind of approach. We'll be like, okay, I didn't understand exactly what you meant when you said this. Can you kind of explain that a little bit further or whatever? It's always asking to understand. And so then the person would go a little bit more. And then if someone has something to add to what a person has said and say, just in addition to, or I want to also say, and I agree with whatever. You can always agree with the person, but you can never in that group say, I disagree with, because we're not attacking people. So doing that part up front is very helpful, because that way we've all agreed to what we're going to allow or not allow in our discussion. And then when you said around robin and things like that, I remember we also say if things start to get a little bit to a point where people are uncomfortable, we are going to, like Tim and I will be monitoring the group. We'll stop and say, okay, let's pair up and just talk about this. And then we'll get into smaller groups, have a question to discuss or something very simple. It may not even be related fully to what was just said or what we're discussing, but something that kind of diffuses, giving the groups time to talk back to the larger group, then we come back together and they say, okay, why did we do that? It's like, well, I don't know, we needed a break or whatever. And humor, making sure that there's humor. So it's very intentional work, but that's what we do. And we dedicate 2 hours to it. And we don't spend the full 2 hours doing it. I will say this. The first 10 minutes is like sanctuary. Then we would do a round of the discussion, and then we'll pause. We will actually have intentionally a snack break, because that gives people time to just get away, go to the restroom, whatever, come back into the setting, talk for about 30 more minutes. And then the last 30 minutes, we hear from each respective groups, because there's usually about 3 groups of maybe 10 in the room. And we hear, so what did you all discuss today? And then the scribe would say, well, these are the things that we discussed. And if there's a common theme amongst all 3 groups, that tells us that this is something that we as an institution need to focus on, because they're all saying something about this thing or this theme or this topic. And so that's good too, to not just have one big large group, but to have smaller groups. And if this small diverse groups are all talking about the same thing, then that tells us something about where we are with our progress in like diversity, equity, and inclusion, because that is the topic. It's not just come together and talk about whatever, like the dining hall or the food or whatever. It's not that. We are intentional about, hey, so how do you feel the culture of the campus is right now? What do you all think? We ask intentional questions, and then if there's a shared theme, then we know we need to hone in on those things. You're welcome. And we do more than one too, by the way, a year. It's better, because if you just do one and then hope for the best, because when you come back, it could be the same people, but what we also don't do is make sure, okay, if you were in group 1, go to group 1, we count them off again. You could end up in a different group, because the group think may be different this time. You may not have the same discussion at all. You may feel like, oh, we didn't even discuss that last time I was here, but this group is focusing on this. And it's just a time of openness, learning, and growing together. And so it's good stuff.
Thank you for all of that. Jennifer, jump right in there.
Hi, I also want to echo my thanks for the really good summary overview and reminder. A lot of the concepts you've shared, I've heard about or learned about before, but having this like in a nutshell, simple overview. And I really appreciate the practical examples and suggestions. Just again, hearing like, this is what a microaggression sounds like, and this is what interrupting it looks like, and this is what a good response looks like is helpful. And as far as takeaways on a personal level, the reminder about engaging across difference is helpful. We live, as much as we can in COVID land right now, but we've got sets of neighbors on either side of us that have really different cultural backgrounds, and we all have kids. And I just think like what a tremendous opportunity there. And I want to make sure that we're connecting as neighbors and learning about each other's stuff as much as anybody wants to share. So personally, I'm mindful of that. And then one thing we're going to be doing as a communication team coming up is we, at some point this spring, we're going to try to do a review or an audit. That's a scary word, but a review of our work with a equity and inclusion and diversity lens. And it's hard because we're not exactly sure what we're looking for yet, but what we want to do is put it like literally like our stuff on that, whether it's our website stuff or our publishing stuff or our stories, and just step back and look at it with that lens and say, what do we notice when we do that? And it's hard because some people are like, well, what are we measuring and what are we looking for? And we're like, we just need to practice doing that so that what we're working towards is trying to have that lens be part of our work from the outset and what we look at when we work on a piece. But we have to start with retrospective, right? So I was, when you were talking about the example of implicit bias, and I say this, but I hire all this. So that's kind of what we want to look at. We know this and we've done all these trainings and we say this, but when we look at, oh, look at all the pictures in our things, what are we saying? So I was curious if anyone else in the group maybe has done that or done something similar and had any guidance for us as we start trying to do this more regularly in our practice here.
We're at the very beginning of doing something similar, Jennifer. And I think one thing that is key is to be sure to have participants and faculty and staff who are not within communications, but reflect the diverse audiences that we hope to serve and participate with, to have them as part of that assessment is one thing that I know we're working toward.
That's good. I'll tell you all something that I'm doing too. I think it may be in part of my biography is I'm also a Title IX coordinator. So not only Title VII, when I was talking about making sure that all of those characteristics that are protected there, but I'm doing a lot of reviewing of our policies. And when you look at some policies, you may say, okay, this isn't as equitable as it could be, and just like fixing it, because sometimes what has worked and we just continue to use from like 10 years ago even is not, it doesn't, it's not as inclusive as we want it to be or could be. And I'm reviewing those right now. It may not be the policies itself, but the resolutions. If there's like violations and things, we have to be more mindful. Like if we're saying that we're protecting, all these demographics, whatever, where's that stated? Is it in our minds or is it written somewhere? And so we're being very intentional about reviewing all of our policies and practices. And we just put in recently, I think a year ago, transgender protections. And even though there are some legal laws that do not cover some of the like religion and some of the other demographics, we are putting it into our institutions because we're private. We could do, so making sure like, oh, where's that captured? Oh, it's not. So we need to put it in there. It's like we know it, but is it written? And if it's not written, how do we know which procedure we need to follow to correct it? And we're also doing a lot of more transformative kind of justice practices, if you will. We are more into more reconciliation as a foundation as opposed to more punitive. And so just your practices and everything, what do you really want? Are you really just want to chastise and put people, over here for doing this thing, or do you want them to learn something and to teach something in this moment? So we're doing a lot of what I call informal resolutions for our remedies to when things happen. So we actually, conversation is becoming part of it, but both parties have to be willing to sit down and have a conversation. I did one yesterday. I'm doing another one next week, but people are willing, and that's part of it too. There's a high level of honesty of what people are willing to do. And yes, I think it was Catherine that said it's uncomfortable. It is, but we can't let the discomfort stop us from doing the work.
Stacy commented in the chat that they're doing something similar, started recently, working with their college's DEI committee.
Awesome.
I'm from the Ohio State University, and on all levels, university, college, departmental, there are DEI groups, offices, and it's very well marketed so that the people running those programs, as a matter of fact, our next speaker is from one of those departments. The Ohio State University's name is Dr. Leo Taylor. He'll be speaking in January, March. He's transgender, female to male, and so be a very unique take on diversity and inclusion from Dr. Taylor. Any other answers to Jennifer's question or any other questions for Ms. Parker? Had a great talk today. I really appreciate that, Ms. Parker. It was wonderful meeting you. Latasha, anything else that you want to include?
No, I just want to thank Ms. Parker for an excellent presentation, something that we can hopefully take this information, valuable information, back to our workplace, but just beyond that, what we do every day in our lives. So thank you all ACE members for attending this wonderful presentation. Again, thank you, Ms. Parker.
You're very welcome. And I just want to say thank you all. I'm seeing your comments come through. I was trying to catch them all. And I get a lot of that energy. I love it. Thank you so much. You all are wonderful. This is great. And
on a Friday afternoon, that's saying something.
Yeah, it means I'm going to crash when I get home. That's what it means.
I dismiss everybody to your afternoon naps now.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Hope to see
Thank
you
you.
in March. Take care.
Thank you all. Thank you.